You're listening to The Marketing Trench, the official podcast where no real estate professional gets left behind in the pursuit of building a business they can be proud of. A podcast designed to help you build the foundation of a powerful real estate career. Join real estate experts Ricardo Bueno, Marketing Technology Director at West, Dustin Stevie, CEO of Lighthouse Escrow, and Scott Shang, partner at Bywise Mortgage and founder of Find My Way Home, as they bring you real-world strategies, marketing ideas, and solutions straight from the trench.
So, Dustin, what are we talking about today?
Yeah, welcome to episode 5. Today, we're going to be digging into the subject of setting expectations when you meet with clients, especially with regards to marketing technology that we're talking about. And so to set the table here for a second, the thing that we've all run into in our various capacities is we go to conferences or we ourselves are talking to people and we roll out the tools and we see the potential of the tools. Mm-hmm. We've actually seen the tools we're talking about work. But when we start talking about them, the people we're talking to, our clients or our contacts, start having very elevated outsized expectations. And the expectation starts to feel like, if I do this tool, then all of my problems will be solved. Like that's an overblown version of it, but that's like basically what people start aiming at. Yeah. And so you have to be able to have the conversation where you talk honestly about tools. You want to talk optimistically about them, right? Like nobody wants to sign on to something that Goodbye, Scott. For those who aren't watching on camera, Scott just dropped behind the table. He fell asleep.
I was trying to raise the arms up. I dropped. My bottom dropped out. That's what Ricardo's mom said.
So you start having that conversation about tools, and what ends up happening is, you want to be able to make people excited about the tool, but then they get too excited about the tool. Like they think, okay, it's going to solve all my problems. So how do you talk honestly about a tool? How do you talk optimistically about a tool? But how do you not oversell a tool? That's the subject of today's conversation. And not just from the perspective of us, maybe pitching tools or telling people what we're doing, but also if you're adopting a tool, how do you avoid yourself from running into the problem of adopting a tool and then stopping using it after a very short period of time because you're like, oh, this isn't delivering on the promise?
I actually think that this conversation is even deeper than that, because when you talk about specific tools, I think the context where we started this conversation off air was with lead generation, with new prospects. So there's operational and systemized tools to help you run your business. But we've kind of been talking a lot about automation in the lead generation and conversion space.
The last 30, 60, 90 days especially.
Yeah. No, because listen, consumer direct is a very serious thing. As you have, you've got a lot of iBuyers out there in the real estate space. You've got Zillow taking over with generating all the leads and the whole selling your clients back to you. You put your listings up and Zillow gets them, sells back the leads. And so there's a lot of these technologies out there. So individual business owners, real estate agents, mortgage guys, they want to compete in that space too. And there's definitely ways to do it, but we don't have the money and the systems necessarily to make it flow and right. Create those expectations. The very first thing I think that you need to understand is there's only two ways you get new business. You either get it from a referral, sphere of influence or professional referral, or you can get it consumer direct, you're buying online leads. And kind of specifically what we're talking about is the online leads piece, because it's a much, much lower conversion. There isn't it doesn't come in with a relationship attached to it. And you have to have different expectations. If you think that these are clients or prospects, you're thinking about it wrong. So where the technology comes in and it basically helps you to manage through the much, much lower conversion rates and create some sort of automated conversation and conversion touch points so that you can bubble up the people that you potentially can have a conversation with. So it's that mindset, it's that perspective of going from a lead is not well, in my business and the mortgage business, we say leads are not loans, and they're not. And in the real estate space, leads are not home buyers and they're not home sellers. They're names and phone numbers for the most part, and an email address.
Right.
And there is a tremendous trust gap between a consumer filling out a form on the internet and you getting a commission check or even getting a conversation with them. And recently, because that's some of the things that we do for our businesses, and in our business, me as a lender, we do some of this stuff for our agent partners, and Ricardo, for a living. You go out and you teach agents how to use these tools, and we see it over and over and over again, where we're looking at it and we're almost falling out of our chairs with the response, the engagement that they're getting, and they're like, this doesn't work. And it's weird. It's mind-blowing, and it's a mindset. I mean, Ricardo, you run into this every single day of unreal. I don't want to call it unrealistic. I want to call it uneducated expectations, perhaps.
Why?
Because they don't know what they don't know. So it's not that they're not unrealistic expectations, because there are nuggets of gold in there, but you gotta do a lot of shoveling and a lot of sifting.
I think so. Scott and I were talking earlier in the week, and I was expressing some frustrations with just some frustrations in general.
You sounded like a drunken sailor. Is that how you express your frustrations?
The technology, I think. You made a comment earlier, and the comment was the technology isn't supposed to replace having to do the work.
Yeah.
So no matter what system you're implementing, that system, that piece, never replaces having to build trust or do the work. And I think for a lot of people, they feel like, why isn't this working?
Well, at Dustin's point, that's not how they're sold. They're sold that they replace the work. So when you go to the websites or the webinars or the conferences, they're sold as done for you. They're as done for you solutions, when they're not.
So let me extract something that I heard you say at the very start of this. It's kind of this whole point that you're making. The first step here in managing your own expectations or the expectations of people you might be talking to pitch a product is to be very aware of what it is that you're getting. So in the case of leads, those aren't loans. And you have to be aware that those leads that come in, that's not money in the bank. That's just a different kind of work that you have to do now. So is that fair to say, like, that's like one thing to do to manage expectations, is to be aware that when you push the button or turn the key, you're aware of what the product is that you're going to receive.
Yeah, and it's almost not. It's definitely not any less work. They're actually, consumer direct or online leads are actually much, much more work than a direct referral. But the kind of the interesting part about it is, because it was originated through technology, you can use technology to help augment bridging that trust gap.
We say it in our presentations, to assist the sale.
To assist the sale, yeah. Right. And the job is earning their trust. It's not. That's the challenge. When somebody's referred to you and I say, hey, you need to work with Dustin. You actually did that for us like last week. You sent somebody over and you said, hey, somebody was asking about a loan, and they came to us, and it's like, hey, if Dustin referred us over, then he's already vetted them. He trusts them. So I trust them also.
I sent you somebody and said that I trusted you?
Not me, Josh.
That doesn't sound right.
Yeah, it was Josh. Yeah, it was Josh. It was my partner. It wasn't me, obviously. Who would? So
Dustin's like, oops.
Damn it. Blew that relationship, burned that bridge. So now our job as professionals becomes, we have to build that bridge to bridge the trust gap. There is zero trust when people are filling out information online, and in a lot of cases they may not even know somebody's going to call them. They may be thinking that they're going to get an answer or a solution by answering, by filling out a form.
Mhm.
Maybe they think they're going to get a list of homes, or they're going to
download or something.
They're going to get a download or foreclosure properties or
I'm willing-
below market properties or a list of open houses. Who knows? Or in our case, they might think they're getting an interest rate. Right? Oh, what are today's interest rates? Let me fill this out.
Right.
Yeah. And so there's a disconnect there, and the overwhelming majority of form fillers and button pushers are using that for the convenience of getting instant gratification. It's the Google users. It's our attention span is I want it now. I expect it as quickly as I can type out the question and press enter. I want an answer.
But so when that lead comes in, that's when the job starts. That's when the work begins. And I think the false expectation is a lead came in, either they're going to buy or they're not. And if they say no on the first attempt, this is a bad lead.
Or if they don't pick
and
up.
That's kind of the expectation that
is.
That's the overwhelming expectation that I see day in, day out. So then, Ricardo, to your point, maybe another way to manage expectations, or a second way to manage expectations, is to have a clear idea of the work you have to do once you get the product. So in this case, the product is a lead, right? So you know the product you're getting a lead, not a loan. And now it's like the second thing is, now I know what work I have to do. And people misunderstand. They think, oh, I got this call. That's a deal. And I should be able to pick it up. And if they don't accept the terms of my deal, then that's no good. And what you're saying is, no, like you're starting a conversation, or you're starting a relationship, or you have to deliver. Like there's certain kinds of work you have to do, and that work you're not closing them.
Right.
Well, and there's a very building a database and nurturing a database is also very much a long game. A lot of people, a lot of consumers that initiate the process online are not necessarily, a lot of them are in the research stage. Mm-hmm. A lot of them are in just the very, very early exploratory stages. They're not ready to talk to somebody. And so, because there is a large percentage of those people that will do something over time. And if our expectations are, I call them 3 times in 2 days and they don't pick up, and then you don't put it into a CRM, which is what we've been harping on our other episodes, that CRM is another part of that machine. You got to get them in there. You got to nurture those things. You've got to build that trust over a longer period of time, so that when they are in a position, it's almost the law of reciprocation, but it's the long game. It's being there and becoming familiar enough. It follows the same rules of marketing and advertising. Somebody has to see your thing several times before they notice it once. They have to notice it several times before you even get on their radar. And then if they notice it enough times, when they are in a position to make a decision about that particular thing, you're one of the first people that come to mind. And they're like, you know what? I feel like this guy has given me a ton of value over a long period of time. Let me call them up and get their opinion. That could happen in 3 months. It could happen in 3 years. I've literally had people call me back that said, hey, you talked to me, or I've been, getting your emails, watching your website for 5 years, 6 years, or we had a conversation 8 years ago. That happened before. And it's like, now I'm ready. And I'm like, okay, cool. I don't really remember the conversation, but it was an investment in that relationship.
Right.
And that's what we're talking about. You can use automation to deliver that investment into that relationship. But a lot of people don't get instant feedback, so they assume it's not working.
Right.
But just because they're not raising their hand doesn't mean they're not listening.
Yeah, I mean, to use kind of a metaphor, it's like if you're planting a garden and you run a drip line, right? So you go plant the seeds, maybe like a little plant or something, you run the drip line and it runs automatically. That plant is getting watered every day. You don't notice it because drip lines are quiet. And when they drip, there's not a lot of water going on. But over time, the plant grows and it flowers. Eventually, it'll flower. But it's going to take months. It could take a year.
Did you start a flower bed this week?
I did. How did you know? You're like a psychic.
That was really good.
That was perfect. That was perfect. You don't see the water going in, but it's seeping into the ground, and it's creating nutrients, and the plant is growing.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, It's a great metaphor.
And along the lines of doing that kind of, perpetual work, as you were talking, I was thinking more about
your garden.
My garden and how beautiful it is and how I hope the succulents don't die.
You can't kill succulents.
No, I've managed to.
I'm not taking botanical advice from you.
And the metaphor just died. I lost my thought with the metaphor.
So, okay, well, let me pick something up. So, again, the thing, there's an element of trust and faith that you are doing the right actions so that your prospect will bloom,
right?
According to your metaphor. So if you're not doing anything, if you're not investing anything in that relationship, then what's building that trust? And some of this comes to done for you, drip in a box, automatic email drips, these kinds of things. There's absolutely an element of consistency regardless of content, but there has to be some good content in there. There has to be something that leads the person to believe that you're a real person. You're resourceful. You're a real person, that if they were to pick up the phone and start to talk to you. And I don't know if I've ever told you guys this story, but the greatest compliment that I've ever received, and I've received it more than once, is people who would call me from my website. They would say, you know what? You sound just like your website. You sound just like your writing.
Oh, that's huge.
So,
that's hard to do.
Yeah. Well, it's not when you're not smart enough to do anything other than just be yourself. So I never trying to trick people. I'm honestly trying to share my experience. And as professionals, you've got to remember, and I see this so much in the mortgage space because we've got these lenders out there that are spending hundreds of millions of dollars to convince people that this process is something other than it actually is. And it is still a challenging process to get into a home, as well it should be. I mean, you're borrowing hundreds of thousands of dollars. You're probably making the single biggest purchase in your entire lifetime. These are monumental life events. Yeah. And there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of risk assessment. There's a lot of somebody's got to be comfortable lending you the money. There's a lot of these things. And then you've got these commercials that say, oh, push button, get loan. And it doesn't work that way. And
but so it does work that way sometimes.
It works that way if you are the rare person that has that. Well, we call it hair. So if there's no hair on the deal at all, so like you have no second jobs, you have no other income, you own no other properties, you get paid hourly or salary, it never varies, you've been at your job forever and you have perfect credit. You're absolutely going to sail through that process. But the very second you don't, and that's the rest of us, the very second you don't, if you're self-employed, if you're entrepreneurs like us, nope, you're not going to make it through that process because that telemarketer is going to get twisted up and they're not going to know what to do. I'm talking about loans right now, but the loan is an important piece of that real estate piece.
Yeah.
So if you're going out there and you're saying, look at this beautiful home, that's an easy sale. Yes, that's a beautiful home. Now, what do I got to do to get that home? And then you got to go to the hairy part, which is you got to talk to the lender. You got to basically open the kimono, tell them everything about who you are, what you make, how you spend your money, how you save your money, and all of that. And that kind of, so if you watch a TV commercial, you don't know that's the process. But if you're talking to somebody, and let's say for the next 6 to 9 months, you explain to that client coming from you in a series of videos or emails, and you say, hey, listen, I see you're interested in potentially buying a home. Over the next 9 months, I'm gonna help you get comfortable with this process so that there are no surprises along the way. And if you do that, you don't know if people are paying attention to that, but you damn well can be sure that at the end of that process, they're going to be like, that sounds like somebody that really cares about me having a good experience. Mm-hmm. That's going to be the first person I'm going to call, hopefully.
Okay, so 2 things have emerged as you've been talking. So the first thing is, one way that you manage expectations when you're meeting with clients is understand the narrative they have in their head coming in to meet with you. So in the case of loans, you've got Rocket Mortgage out there, push button, get loan. And when someone comes to you and it may be like that, but it probably won't be like that, you've got to be ready to deliver a plain English explanation that doesn't sound like you're hedging or trying to create wiggle room that the client does. That can be dangerous because someone sitting across the table from you can start feeling like, oh, Scott's saying things to me because he's trying to confuse me and get me into the abyss where then he plays games and makes money and I don't know what's going on. We deal with that in escrow all the time, right? It's like if there's any kind of ambiguity happening, people begin to look at us and like, what's happening? Is the title guy up to something? Is the lender up to something? What's my real estate agent doing? So that's the first thing.
There's a lot that goes on in the background that, quite frankly, the consumers don't want to know about.
Right.
But sometimes we feel compelled to say, okay, now all these things are going on in the background. You don't have to worry about that, which is probably the worst thing you could say to somebody. But they also aren't going to really grasp all of the moving parts. There's a lot of moving parts in buying a house.
Yeah, and so maybe not only are you in doing that managing your own or their expectations, you're also managing your own. Because if your expectation is I can make my deliverable as simple as Rocket Mortgage, you're wrong because you don't have millions of dollars that Rocket Mortgage had because they're a Quicken product, right?
Yeah, the only deliverable that Rocket Mortgage has is an online application.
Yeah, but how much money do you think they spent on that sucker?
Hundreds of millions of dollars.
Right, exactly. So you can't replicate that as an individual. And if you try to, you're going to fail and you're not going to be as good as them with their millions of dollars and their legions of developers and designers.
But I have the same technology as they have for getting an application and getting an approval and going through the process, actually better. But all they're doing is getting people to fill out a form. That's the entire purpose of those hundreds of millions of dollars. They're not backing it up with anybody that gives a shit about them.
Right. They don't need to because that's not their business model.
That's not how their business model. It's churn and burn. It's crank it through.
The no hair people.
The no hair people.
A ton of money off of them.
Exactly. And if you don't fit into that box, they're not telling you that you could qualify for a loan somewhere else. They're just saying, you don't qualify. You said something that was important. You said when you're sitting across from somebody and you're talking to them, you need to be able to put yourself in their shoes. It's that empathy. You have to have empathy for the consumer. That's a lot harder online because the only thing you know about somebody online is they don't want to sit across the table from somebody. They don't want to talk to somebody on the phone. If they did, they would have picked up the phone and called somebody. So the only thing we know two things about them. We know they're curious and we know they don't want to talk to somebody. So that's a hell of a thing to have to overcome. It can absolutely be overcome because it is every single day. But it is a process. It's a drip line. It's a drip line for an annual that blooms for 1 week and it blooms for 30 days a year.
Right.
But it takes 11 months of nurturing to give it enough nutrients to bloom.
And so let's go back now. So we're at now point number 4. And along the lines of the drip line metaphor, you have to know what every tool in your tool belt is doing to, nurture or help you do the work you need to do. So for example, in the garden I planted, I have a Rachio, which is a smart watering system that detects wind and rain and all the rest. And then it turns on my sprinklers and turns them off automatically based on the, weather conditions and stuff, right? So you're not
millennials. I used a hose when I grew up.
Yeah. Automate it. There's an app. So that serves one function, but then the actual drip line itself serves a different function, right? So the Rachio isn't running the water to the plants. That's something else. And then even once you're at the plant, there's a little nozzle that controls how much water goes in and out. So now extending the metaphor to sales, right? There should be a part of your sales funnel process that brings the water in and controls how that water is coming in. Like the Rachio controls the water flow from my house out to the plants. That would be your lead.
It also determines the best time.
There you go.
So it determines the best time to do it in the right frequency and the right. It's really it's determining when to send those things out and when to provide that, those signals that says, okay, turn on the water now. These are ideal conditions.
Yeah. So that might be your Facebook ad or something like that. I don't know exactly what the conversion is, but you need to know to manage your own expectations. You need to know when you take a tool off the shelf, what is that tool doing?
Yeah.
Is it generating like flow? Is it bringing the water in? Is it dripping? Is it controlling when the stuff goes out? Going back to the metaphor, the thing that actually drips at the plant, maybe that's the final touch point. So that maybe that's your email, or maybe that's the ringless voicemail, or maybe that's the text.
Well, and let's expand on that. And again, when you have that automation, if one row is this type of plant, so if one row is this type of lead source, and then this row is a different type of plant with a different lead source that requires a different frequency of nutrition,
right?
You can't treat each of those so that mechanism, if all it's doing is turning on and off, but this particular row needs half as much water than this one, and that's not built into that process, it's going to be different. So it can't be one size fits all. There's going to be, it's not just turn it on, turn it off.
Sometimes you have a drip, sometimes you have a sprinkler.
Well, and you have different, so to translate, let's bring this back home to mortgage and real estate people. Sometimes it's different types of communications in different ways. So what we're usually doing is we're layering different types of outreach and different messages and different communication, so that when the right message at the right time hits the right person, that person's coming up. So sometimes you're sending them 2 or 3 different messages. Sometimes you're calling at different times of the day. Sometimes you're sending text messages, or you're making phone calls, or you're doing things like that. You never know what somebody's going to respond to. So sometimes you're layering a bunch of different things. And, we'll see all the time somebody says, well, I don't want this to go out at that time. And you're like, well, okay, the majority of these people aren't going to respond at any time right now, so we don't know when that is. And it kind of has to go out, because you don't know what everybody's individual timing, interest, all of that kind of stuff is. So
right. So to manage, you recently had a client that you looped me in on kind of the conversation you were having with them, and the client said that exact thing to you. You're using this tool, it's dripping people. I don't like the time that it's going out and dripping. And what I'm hearing you say is, we don't know the perfect time to actually hit the people with the drip. So the point is, drip them and let them self-identify the time.
And sometimes it's also is a communication going at a time that you think is inconvenient. This particular one was early in the morning. Does that mean the entire system doesn't work?
Right.
Absolutely not. So you have, they ignored you they're going to ignore you if you send nothing. They're going to ignore you 95% of the time, regardless of what time you send it out. And in this particular case, it was a text message that went out in the morning. So what is your assumption that they have their text alarm super loud with their phone on their pillow, and that you woke them up and they're going to be mad and now they think you're a jerk? No, chances are they're going to wake up, they're going to see there's a message, and they're going to ignore it like they do all the other ones until they're ready.
See, right. But we talked about that, and you said that, oftentimes we're looking at from our own perspective and our previous past experience.
Yeah, and we're treating it like we're sitting across the table from them. You're not sitting across the table from them. You do not have a relationship with them yet. Yeah. All you're doing is just throwing lines in the pond. You're just lining up fishing poles and throwing out lines. You don't know when and where or how.
Yeah, that's right. And so to manage, I just keep coming back around to the subject of managing those expectations. If your expectation is that this is anything other than throwing the lines in the pond, right? Because again, you don't have a good sense of what this tool is really supposed to do or where it fits in a process or anything else, then you're going to find yourself burned out and angry because you're not getting the results you think you're supposed to be getting. Mm-hmm. People who are responding enthusiastically, that can't wait to shake your hand and give you a hug, sign your, listing agreement, or, get a loan application going, or opening up escrow, or whatever the case might be, ordering prelim, right? Like, if that's your expectation and that's not happening immediately, it's going to lead to self-defeat.
Well, I mean, think about it. If you or anybody or if somebody played a joke on you and put your name on one of those forms online. And everybody knows what happens when you do that. Your phone rings nonstop for about 2 weeks straight, and then it starts to die off.
Yeah.
So those companies that spend those hundreds of millions of dollars know that they are going to inconvenience the shit out of you by following up like absolute crazy. And and hoping that one of these times you pick up the phone, and then they're going to try to pull you in.
Right. And it's a numbers game for them. They're just running percentages.
Right. And we're not comfortable. We're not necessarily comfortable doing that as entrepreneurs. We don't like that. We wouldn't want to do that to somebody else. So we're a little less aggressive, which means we're a little less effective at getting those people on the phone, because we're not carpet bombing them with marketing. And so you're giving them a little bit of time. It's just understanding. Yeah, it's setting your expectations. It's knowing that it's knowing what it is, because once you know what it is and once you see the magic of it, I mean, it could literally take a good 6 months. I mean, I think I've told you guys this. When I started my website, I didn't get my first deal off my website until 18 months. It was over a year and a half before I made money off of the very first person from my website. And for the first 12 months, you don't hear anything.
Right.
You don't know who's paying attention to that stuff. But when they do, but you're making that investment, because once you get the machine going and once you build a big enough database, somebody in that database is going to come to the top. One of those fish, all you're doing is when you're doing online marketing and you're doing consumer direct, you're feeding that pond. You're just dumping in buckets of fish. And eventually one of those fish are going to be hungry. And eventually you're going to have so many fish that when that one fish that's been in there for 6 months gets hungry, guess what? There's another fish that's also been in there for 6 months that's going to be hungry right after that one. So it takes a long time to build up this machine, but it's important to have all the parts in place. You have to have the CRM. You have to be able to have that long-term communication and nurture. And then you have to have a mechanism for when they do raise their hand that you get right in there and you build that relationship. And quite frankly, by the time they contact you, they already know you. They already know who you are. They already trust you. You've bridged the trust gap, and they're ready to do business with you.
So I think that's really the fifth and kind of final, I think, expectation setting piece of advice we have, which is because you're not dealing with warm referrals in the case of, what we're talking about here, which is lead gen primarily from online, expect to play the long game.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't expect to play the long game, your expectations aren't set properly, you're going to burn out.
This also ties back into our past client episode. It's the exact same thing. If you're not nurturing those past clients, you're going to lose them, and you're always going to be out there trying to fill that pond. But it really is the same process. You still need to communicate with your past clients over a long period of time. It's almost the exact same thing as the prospecting piece, except for you haven't built a relationship yet. Ricardo, you're awful quiet. You have more experience in this than we do. What kind of things are you seeing?
My advice is all tactical advice.
But like what?
Well, no, it's when you're getting online leads, what's your short-term nurture strategy and what's your long-term nurture strategy? Right. And it's understanding and activating those systems so that you do have an aggressive, what I preach is, have an aggressive short-term contact strategy. When those leads don't convert, you're trying to convert the hot opportunities.
Right.
And then if you don't aggressively convert somebody within those first 2 weeks, then you put them into a long-term drip campaign. And
it's not a bad lead. It's a database.
Right. And it's just, we're using technology, like you say in your presentations, like we say in our presentations. We're using technology to assist the process of nurturing that relationship and make a sale. And I think the mistake we make is we're using technology to deliver commission checks, and that's not it at all.
Well, and all the way back to how Dustin opened is that's how they're sold.
Right.
They are sold the successes are sold, not the process, not the timeline, not managing the expectations.
All right, so I want to quickly recap the kind of 5 lessons and then what Ricardo just said, because I think it's really valuable. So the first, if you're trying to manage expectations, yourself or your client's expectations, the first thing to keep in mind is that you need to know the product or the result you're going to get when you use a tool. Leads, not loans. That's number 1. Number 2 is know the work you need to do once you get that product, right? So it's the difference between thinking, I'm going to close a deal versus thinking, this is the start of a relationship that I need to nurture, right? The third thing is you need to be able to explain the process. As you're nurturing the relationship, you need to be able to explain the process in plain English, understanding with empathy, like you said, Scott, what the other person across the table from you is feeling. You need to be able to explain the process in plain English so that they understand what's about to happen. And you're managing not only their expectations, but your own. Because they might be coming in with these baked in assumptions of, I'm going to push a button, everything's going to magically happen. And you're like, okay, that's how it's sold. That is that's a hook, but it's a very narrow set of people that applies to. And so now let me, plainly explain, this is what's going to happen, right? And that also helps you manage your own expectations. So in your case, Scott, you're up against like Rocket Mortgage, or in my case, there are automated platforms that are starting to merge on the escrow side. It makes everything seem really easy, but it's like you as the small, independent entrepreneurial person can't replicate what the big dogs with their tens of millions of dollars are doing.
It's hard to replicate their software.
Their software part. But you can deliver other things of value, such as a real human experience that the algorithm wouldn't deliver because the algorithm would cut them out because they don't fit that narrow band of people that are targeted by the algorithm. So explain the process in plain English. Fourth, know what every tool you've decided to use is actually doing. Is it creating flow, like a Facebook? It's filling a pipeline. Is it determining drip, like maybe a good CRM? Is it the actual drip itself, like the thing that's touching, right? Is it a sprinkler or is it like a little drip nozzle, right? Is it a text message or is it an actual phone call, right? Understanding certain relationships, to use the metaphor of the garden, some plants require very, very small amounts of nurturing over, very occasional periods of time. Some plants require lots of nurturing over, even a short period of time, like a tree drinks a lot more water than a succulent, right? So understand what every one of the tools you're using is doing in the process. And then finally, understand that unless we're talking about getting a hot referral from somebody, which this whole podcast hasn't really been about that. It's been about the kinds of leads you get from online primarily. You're playing a long game. And if you don't have that expectation in your mind, then you're going to be in trouble because it's not going to deliver those immediate results. To what Ricardo just said, if you think like tech needs to assist your process, but it's not there to deliver you commission checks. I mean, it will over the long period of time.
It gives you an opportunity to build a relationship. It doesn't build the relationship.
It doesn't 100%. Build the relationship. I mean, it contributes to building the relationship. Like if it deploys videos that you're making, for example, then that helps build your credibility with an audience. But it's not going to be the thing that closes the deal and gets you the check. Well, you don't get to. It's not lean back. In other words.
So here's a perfect example, and this is going back to the example that we've been having this conversation about. Is this particular person? They're doing. We're using Facebook. We're generating leads, buyer leads on Facebook. And there was this one situation that made them very, very uncomfortable, but on a very, very minimum spend of the leads that came in, one of them got a hold of the person, talked to the person, the automation. This was an automation. This wasn't the actual person buying the leads. This was part of the automation. It's a outsourced ISA. It's a somebody who follows up on the leads for you.
ISA is an inside sales associate.
Inside sales associate. It's essentially a 24/7 service that follows up on your leads for you for like that hot period. They spoke to somebody. They're in New York. They said they talked to them 3 weeks ago, and they said, yes, we are interested in buying in California. We are not going to be in California until the 23rd.
We're on vacation in New York at the moment.
We're not, but we're going to be coming to your state, and we are interested. That was a live phone conversation that somebody had, but this person who's using this process, because their expectations were not consistent with what was being done, they said, "Oh, this doesn't work. Shut that off. We don't want to do this anymore. This isn't working out for me." The fact that I feel like you inconvenienced one person means the whole system doesn't work. I'm like, bro, you got somebody who picked up the phone, had a conversation, and said, yes, call me. I'm going to be in town in 3 weeks. Yes, we are interested. That is a golden opportunity. Right. And when you look at the return on that investment, it was amazing, but unfortunately, this person had wanted to abandon the entire process because they thought one thing didn't work the way that they thought it should.
Yeah, and it wasn't a long game view because they were expecting commission checks when they pushed the button.
Yeah, and it's unbelievably frustrating because we have so many years of experience doing this, and we're like, yeah, that is a really, really good result. You should be stoked about this process.
Yeah. Yeah, and to Ricardo's point then, once you have your expectations properly set, then you can start thinking really tactically. You can sit down with somebody like Ricardo and say, okay, I now understand like the whole frame of reference here. I've got my expectations managed. And Ricardo can say, great, okay, so here's what we're going to do for a short-term nurture. Here's what we're going to do for a long-term. Here's how you should phrase it, whatever.
That's that messaging. That's the what message goes through what medium, what's the frequency of the messaging, what's the consistency of the messaging, and what is the message, and how do you build that trust over a long period of time so that you have an opportunity when they're in a position to do so.
Yeah, perfect. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, there are other things that should be done to manage expectations, like I learned some lessons the hard way, had my expectations set high, and it turned out that it didn't work out that way. Go to our community and contribute your ideas. We'd love to see them. We'd love to interact with them. And maybe if it's the kind of thing we look back and we like, oh man, we did miss that point, we might cycle back around and talk about it on the podcast. Check out our show notes to see where you can sign up to join in the community and how you can contribute. And if you want to, see any more thoughts that we may have had after, publishing this podcast, we'll be putting those thoughts in the community as well. This has been the Marketing Trench Podcast. Until next time.
Yeah.